here. I want to talk a little bit about trust building because it's become such a big piece of conflict resolution. And a lot of places around the world, whether it's a personal conflict or whether it's a big national conflict, the issue of trust comes up in one way or another. So many of you may know that a lot of the negotiation theory was developed in Massachusetts, started over around Harvard University, and then was captured in a book initially called Getting to Yes, which really changed the world of negotiation from one where we were in zero-sum game mode, all about battles between one and the other, to a situation where we're trying to get the so-called win-win, and both parties are trying to meet their underlying interests. So that was great 30 years ago. It continues to be developed today. And one of the areas is in trust building, because if you're meeting each other's interests, that's one area. You're basically talking about median interest going forward. So there is an element of trust. I need to be able to trust that they will comply with whatever we agree to in the negotiation. I want to give you one sort of extreme example that happened recently. The big news in the peace world this last year was that the Colombia peace process went through late last year. And we were involved in one small piece of it early on. In 2015, we were invited in to work with the Colombian military, who would become a subcommission to the negotiators that were in Havana, Cuba, negotiating. And working with the military is a challenge because, of course, they're trained not necessarily in peace negotiations, but in war. And so they came to the first session fairly open about that, saying, as I introduced the concepts of we're going to learn about negotiations, we're going to learn about communications, we're going to learn about collaborations, trust building. There was a colonel in the room. There was a rather high-level, high-ranking officers in the room, but one of the junior guys was a colonel, and he sort of stood up and said, "Look, Jim, I don't know why you're talking to us about trust or about negotiation or about collaboration. I don't want to do any of those things. I want to kill the guerrillas. I want to kill the FARC guerrillas. In fact, that's what I've been doing for 40 years. I'm good at it. Just let me do it. Why are you talking to me about trust?" So that's what we would call a trust challenge going into negotiations. I was a little bit flippant at first. I said, you know, you're going to do that because your commander-in-chief has ordered you to do it. And they actually kind of liked that I was flippant in that regard and opened up enough to listen to what we had to talk about. So the first thing I said was, we're going to separate out two different dimensions of trust. One is emotional trust. Now, all of us have experienced emotional trust. We know it when we see it. It's very much like love. You know that you trust somebody or you don't trust them. You can't necessarily always describe where it comes from. So equally with trust, we say, yep, we trust them or we don't. One of the benefits of that, of course, is that we recognize it right away. But one of the downsides is that it's a little bit subjective. It's hard to measure. It's hard to manage. And certainly in peace processes, you probably heard about trust building measures. If a deal is reached, let's take some small steps to keep building trust. One of the disadvantages is during that time when you're building trust, if anything happens on either side to break the trust down, it's gone, right? And it's hard to get back. Once trust is broken, it's hard to get back. So we've switched that around and we've looked at trust now linked to interest or need. I will trust somebody more if I believe they will meet my interests going forward. And we break it down even further than that. We break it down and talk about we want something measurable, we want something that we can negotiate, and we want something that we can influence in the short term. So we've started to describe strategic trust as a function of how much or to what extent do I believe that the other party understands my interests. So understanding. And to what extent do I believe the other party is able to meet my interests, ability. And to what extent do I think that the other party is willing to meet my interests? So if the other party is clearly, they understand my interests, are able to meet my interests and willing, my trust strategically tends to go up. And we take that one step further and we say, well, let's quantify that. And this is, granted, a subjective aspect. But we say, if you were to look at the other party and say, give them a score of 0 to 5 on how much they understand your interests. and give them a score of 0 to 5 on their ability to meet your interests, and also a score of 0 to 5 on their willingness to meet your interests. Very quickly, if you get any zeros here, you start to see, okay, this is the deficit. This is where the trust deficit is. It's not emotional. It's not personal. This is not about them specifically, but I don't think they're the right person to be able to meet my interests, for example. So you can work on that in the negotiation. And we take it a step further and say, let's turn this into a math equation. Understanding times ability times willingness equals the level of trust you have. And the reason we do that is because, you guys can tell me, what's 0 times any other number? 0, right? So if I have a high level, if I think they have a high level of understanding my interests and a high level of ability to meet my interests, but I give them a 0 on willingness to meet my interests, I will not trust them to work with me going forward. One of my favorite examples is if I said to somebody in this room, could you help me fly back to San Francisco tonight after the talk? And you say, well, yeah, I totally understand your interests, and yes, I will help you with that. And I'm perfectly willing to go down to Boston Logan Airport and grab an airplane and fly you back to San Francisco. And my next question is, great, I give you a 5 on those. Do you have a pilot's license? And you say, nope, never flown a plane in my life. I give you a 0 on that. I'm not trusting you to fly me back to San Francisco. So we work with this in a lot of different areas, and it's interesting because not only does it start to become quantifiable to some degree, you can see I have somewhere between 0 and 125 points that indicates how much trust of the other party I have. It can go both ways, right? So I can use this to estimate how much do I think they understand my interest. I'm sorry, how much do I think that they think I understand their interests, right? If I demonstrate I understand their interests, they're going to trust me more. Do they think I'm able to meet their interests, and do they think I'm willing to? If I find a deficit there, I can start right away in the negotiation to work on that. I can start right away to explain, look, here's what I understand about your interests. Here's my ability, here's my authority, here's how I will be able to do it, and here's why I might be interested in doing it. So we found a lot more traction in working in trust building this way. It's given us a lot more short-term benefit. Coming back to the Columbia military, that was so interesting, and remember we left them off with the notion of what was basically an expression of, I don't trust these guys emotionally. So we just said, we're not ever going to ask you to do that. That would just be a bridge too far. And in fact, I should say during this session, it was just about 2 weeks after there were 19 military officers that had been killed by the FARC guerrillas in a skirmish outside of the capital city. And several of those people that were killed were friends of people that I was talking to in the room. So you can imagine the emotional distrust was intense. And then we just walked through this formula. We said, you still have to go negotiate with them. And you don't have to trust them emotionally. You don't have to like them even to be able to negotiate with them. But you have to work through these. So talk to me about the ceasefire, which was the number one thing they were negotiating at that point. And I said, do they understand the ceasefire? Well, yes, we've been studying it together in Havana for the last 3 or 4 years. We give them a 5 on that. Fantastic. And what about willingness? Do you think that they're willing to implement a ceasefire? Well, you know, they've been saying they are. We haven't seen it happen yet, but we'll give them a 3 on that. All right, 5 and 3, we're still positive. What about ability? Are they able to implement a ceasefire? Long pause in the room. And somebody finally spoke up and said, that's the problem. We, the military, are a command control organization. They, the guerrillas, say they are, just like we are, but we don't believe it. We don't see evidence of that. We don't think that a deal that's brokered in Havana, a ceasefire that's brokered in Havana, will be implemented in a remote part of Colombia, in Putumayo, or a remote part of the jungle. We don't think that the people in Havana, the spokespersons, have the ability to implement that. So that's where we started to focus. That's where we started to dig in and form our strategy. We talked to them about different ways that they could bring that to the table, bring it up non-personally. This is not about you guys across the table because we've built a good relationship with you as we've gone through this negotiation. But this is very much about our belief that you're not able to do this, and we need to build in guarantees. Just to finish it up, I on Wednesday night I had the pleasure of being invited to a speech by one of the military officers, a general actually, a Colombian general who was with us that time 2 years ago. And he described the process they were involved in, and he said, we got to this point where we started to really strategically analyze what was going on for them and where we could leverage points without just using force. And from that moment on, the peace process went much more rapidly towards success. So it's gratifying to hear him say that, and I think they're very proud of how they shifted their mindset in order to get to trust. I wanted to put that out there as an example of strategic trust building in any given situation. Anytime you're trying to influence decision of other people, whether it's a peace process, if you get involved in those, or whether it's a collaboration between individuals within your community, think about the more dynamic aspects of strategic trust and how to build strategy around that. So thank you very much.